Okay, so we all know Denis Villeneuve as one of the most successful and well-regarded directors of this century, and who out there in the filmmaking world wouldn't want his career? I mean, come on. Multiple trips to the Oscars, all the best talent in the industry wanting to work with him, and it seems like he can do no wrong. Now that's great for Denis, but for most of us, myself included, we're nowhere near that level. So what could we possibly learn from his career that would be relevant for filmmakers who don't have $165 million budgets to work with? I mean, it's not exactly relatable, right? So what if I told you that by looking at Denis' career, you could learn the dead simple secret behind every successful filmmaker, one that applies to any part of the industry, whether you work on documentaries like I do, or you want to direct the next sci-fi epic? Well, that's exactly what I'm telling you, and that's what this video is all about, so let's get into it. Okay, so before we get into Denis and his insane accomplishments, let's just take a second and compare his career to the story of a random struggling filmmaker I was reading about on Reddit recently. This filmmaker is getting a little bit older and he hasn't enjoyed nearly the same level of success. This filmmaker spent their early career, like a lot of us might, shooting no-budget shorts and music videos and then whatever else they could find on the side. The options for this filmmaker are sort of limited because they don't live in LA or New York or any of the big filmmaking centers of the world for that matter, and so breaking into Hollywood seemed even more difficult. But they kept plugging away all through their 30s and they managed to get some arts grants and make a couple of indie films, and for a second they thought like they'd made it. But even though they put everything they had into those projects, the final results weren't exactly like the visions in their head, and they didn't really have much of an international impact. Maybe they picked up a couple of prizes at secondary film festivals, which is cool, but the films didn't really attract much attention outside the indie scene. Now by this point our filmmaker is in their early 40s with young kids, and it seems like this is about as good as it's gonna get for them. So they resigned themselves to just working locally and making small films when they could in their free time. Now that sounds like it's about as far away from Denis Villeneuve's career as you can get, with all his Oscar nominations and whatever more is on the way once the full scope of Dune 2 plays out. I mean, how could that first filmmaker ever hope to get to Denis' level? It's pretty much impossible, right? Well, no, not at all, because that first filmmaker is Denis Villeneuve. He spent the first 20-something years of his career working in Canada in relative obscurity, and he was, I think, 42 years old when he had his first major hit with Incendie that really broke him into the mainstream. Now, I'm not saying everything before that film was bad, not at all, but I'm just being honest, they didn't really get noticed in any big way outside the indie art house world, and it seems crazy that anyone could go from those projects to being considered one of the biggest directors on earth in under 15 years. Seriously, that's insane, and if I'd been talking to someone in his position back then, and Denis himself had told me that he'd be on the Oscars stage just a few years later, I'd be politely embarrassed for them, I think is the best way to put it. And when we take a minute to unpack exactly how Denis did it, there's really only just one core idea that's, in my opinion, responsible for everything. But the idea is so simple that I'm actually gonna hold back for a minute still, because I don't want people to just watch and say, yeah, that's too obvious, and then ignore the real power of it and then go back to doing whatever they were doing or looking for the next easy hack or fast way to the top. So just humor me here, and first let's take a look at a couple of the fundamental rules Denis has followed throughout his career, because I want to set this up the right way. So while I was thinking about this video, I found an article from No Film School about Denis, which gives some great insights into his career. I'll link to the full article in the description, but the first point I want to focus on is especially relevant for filmmakers who are still in the earlier stages of their career. One of the things I've noticed most since starting this channel and running a cinematography course, and even more so during the one-to-one consultation calls I do to help filmmakers with whatever challenges they're dealing with, it's that a lot of people are setting the wrong goals early on. And let me tell you what I mean by that. So during consultation calls, a really common scenario that I find is that newer career filmmakers have an idea for a documentary that they want to make, but they don't know how to go about selling it to Netflix or some other big distributors so that their film will have the massive impact that they want it to. And while I totally get this urge, because why else do we make things if it's not to have people see them, it is the wrong approach according to Villeneuve, and I completely agree. And this applies to any project, not just docs, because the reality is that if you don't have a bunch of connections or a track record of big industry success, more than likely your film will not have a big impact, and you're probably not gonna make any money either. Maybe that sounds harsh, but hold on for a second and let me explain, because that doesn't mean it's not still worth it. A lot of times I think people have this really nebulous idea of what being a filmmaker is all about, especially early on. When you get to Denis' level now anyways, you can sort of pick whatever project you want and know that a studio will likely back you for massive distribution, but the number of people working like that is extremely small, and I'd argue that they only get to keep doing this as long as they churn out hit after hit. As soon as they make one misstep, then suddenly the executives start micromanaging again, so it's a totally precarious position at the top. These are the Christopher Nolans and Sam Mendeses and Greta Gerwigs out there, and what applies to them doesn't apply to 99% of the rest of working filmmakers who have to have day jobs shooting commercials or weddings or whatever. I have a day job personally working as a DP on network TV shows and big budget docs, and only occasionally do I make my own projects. And when I do decide to make something, I never ever expect to sell it. I mean, the first feature-length film I directed has been in progress for going on 4 years now, and it hasn't made a dime or attracted any attention at all. There are no huge networks lined up to buy it, and I knew that going in. So why still do it? Well, because if it does get into some decent festivals, it will be noticed by other filmmakers and producers in the industry who are hopefully gonna like it, and that's gonna increase my reputation to the point where now a production company or a network might actually be willing to give me a decent budget for the next film. Most people are not gonna take chances on someone with no track record, and no matter how excited you are for your ideas, it's only by proving that you can do the work that you're gonna get anywhere. And this idea was central to Denis' approach to his film career early on. Just take a look at this quote. "In your early career, aim for your films to be noticed by other filmmakers, producers, or agencies, not necessarily wider audiences. Make personal stories that showcase your craft. They might not be blockbusters, but showing what you can do with the tools you have on hand can prepare these places to give you larger budgets that allow you to work on bigger stages." And when we think about how his career unfolded, this totally makes sense. I mean, in 2008, he made a movie called Next Floor, which I don't think most people probably have ever seen. I mean, I'd never heard of it before I started Googling him for this video anyways. He was still working in Canada, and he made the movie probably knowing it would have limited international impact. Yet he still worked hard. He made the best movie he could, and it premiered at the Toronto International Film Festival, where it got a jury citation award. Now, that's amazing, but it still didn't get him any huge payday or giant distribution deals. It was just a well-regarded Canadian indie movie. But that opened up more budget for his next film, Polytechnique, which was fantastic and won more prizes, but it also didn't have mainstream success. Then he made Incendie, which got him nominated for an Oscar, and from there he went on to make Prisoners with Jake Gyllenhaal, then Sicario, then Arrival, and then we get to modern Denis, who makes Blade Runner and Dune. From First Floor, a movie most people outside the industry have never heard of, to Dune in 15 years is wild, and he did it because he aimed to make a film his peers would like instead of focusing on having massive distribution. The distribution came after, and when you're starting out, you need to keep this in mind. You'll need to find a day job because we almost all need them, and that could be anything from shooting branded content or real estate videos to working at an accounting firm and making films on the side. But find any way to support yourself that makes sense and make the films that you want to make in the way you want to make them, and slowly raise your profile by earning the respect of your peers. Looking for widespread distribution first is like putting the chicken before the egg, so please just stop because it's 99% not gonna happen. The next principle we can take away from Denis' career is something I've been preaching on this channel since it started more than 2 years ago, but I just can't repeat it enough. And now that I have Denis Villeneuve on my side, I think I'm justified in saying it again. In that same article, Denis says, "Filmmaking is a humbling experience. People who aren't willing to help or learn lessons will be left by the wayside." And before I finish the quote, let me just say from personal experience, this is very true. I had more than a decade of international experience working as a DP on some pretty high-profile productions by the time I directed and shot my first feature, and I naively thought that I had all the skills I needed to pull it off without too much trouble. And like I said, it's now been almost 4 years and the craziest black hole of time and money I've ever been involved in. From losing all our distribution interest overnight when the strikes and then the market slump stopped most nonfiction content buying, all the way to losing full nights of sleep, many nights of sleep, even now after realizing that we're missing something we need for the story, I've been humbled again and again and again throughout this process. So why would I, or any sane person, keep smashing my head against a wall and keep going. Well, Denis finishes that quote by saying, find a tribe that helps each other and understands movies. In other words, you need a community or a network or a tribe or whatever you want to call it. You can't just go it alone and expect to make good work, or you're going to go insane. When I was starting out as a photographer and I couldn't get a paid assignment for the first 2 years of my career, the only thing that stopped me from quitting was the group of photographers I had around me in Cambodia who were way further ahead than me, and they just kept pushing me forwards. Much later, when I started working in Mexico and filming a lot with drug cartels and getting exposed to some pretty extreme violence and risks constantly, the only way I stayed balanced was because I had an amazing network of friends in the industry who understood the things I was dealing with, and then we all supported each other between shoots. And now, years into a feature film that doesn't seem to ever end, the production team behind me are probably the only reason I haven't just walked away from it by now. Your individual vision and talents can only carry you so far in this business, and as the old saying goes, if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. I made a whole networking guide you can get for free in the description, but I can't stress it enough. You need to find other people. And don't think I'm saying you have to be in New York or LA or wherever to do this, because Villeneuve lived in Quebec, which is probably only the 3rd largest production center in Canada, which, even though it looks big on a map, is a country with a total population that's barely the size of California. So wherever you are, find your tribe. If you're lucky, there are lots of other filmmakers in your local area, but even if there aren't, that's okay because we have the internet. You can do it through networking like I talk about in the guide, or you can do it through forums like the Doc Hub community from my cinematography course, or the Art of Documentary, or even Reddit for that matter. This video isn't about how to network though, because that's a full video on itself, and I've already made that video before, but just please accept that you, wherever you are, if you want to do big things, you have to put yourself out there and find your tribe. So what's the overall lesson here, and what can we learn from Denis' career about what holds most filmmakers back? Well, it's really simple, but it's so easy to ignore because his current successes overshadow the long path he had to walk to get to where he is now. I mean, just look at this Instagram post from IndieWire with the caption that says, "Few filmmakers of the 21st century have risen to prominence and prestige with the forcefulness of Denis Villeneuve, whose seemingly unstoppable career has been bolstered by a steady stream of critical respect and commercial success." I mean, come on, do you really think Denis felt unstoppable when he was in his 40s with 2 kids making films that were rarely seen out of some international film festivals? I sort of doubt it. It's only looking back that we can see the string of successes, because the reality is that he was relatively unknown for much longer than he's been unstoppable. And that leads us to the infuriatingly simple secret that's made him into one of the most successful filmmakers of the 21st century. He just kept making films. Even when they had no impact, even when there were no accolades or red carpets, he kept going. Because the only way to guarantee that you don't succeed is to quit, and that's exactly what most people do when things get really challenging. They'll say things like, "This is impossible," or "It was easy for so-and-so because of," or they'll leave YouTube comments laying out all the reasons why someone else has more advantages than they do. Anything to avoid the reality that the filmmakers who succeed are the filmmakers who stay in the game and keep making things. Go look at Villeneuve's IMDb, which lists projects all the way back to the early 90s before his first breakout hit with Incendie in 2010, and I'm willing to bet there's a lot more projects he poured himself into that aren't even listed there. Yes, he's smart and creative and he has talent, but more than anything else, he worked at his goal for a very, very long time, and despite all indications from the world that it wasn't leading to big rewards, he just kept doing it. And if you want to go far, whether that's making docs like I do, or shooting commercials, or even directing the next mainstream blockbuster, you will absolutely need to do the same thing. Because the only way to guarantee failure is to stop, and the only way to give yourself a shot at succeeding is to keep going. See ya.